Dressed Up to the Slaughter is a self-development book which I swear when I bought it was called 12 Ingredients for Business, but on Amazon says it's called 12 and a half. So, but for all of these books, I'm going to read the blurb so you can see, one, how I was lied to, and two, whether immediately from the start you guys think it would not have been a good book and I should not have read it to begin with. In his sixth business book, best-selling author, entrepreneur and investor Gary Vaynerchuk, he also calls himself Gary V, explores the 12 essential emotional skills that are integral to his life and business success, and provides today's and tomorrow's leaders with critical tools to acquire and develop these traits. It actually goes on for a lot longer, but I think you get the gist. We're not gonna waste any more time dwelling on what the content is. And the reason why there's no point dwelling on the content is because there really isn't any. So each ingredient is supposed to be a different emotional skill or emotion that you need to conquer to be successful in business. I feel like most people know this already. You just get frustrated that there isn't any substance to it whatsoever. At the end of each section, or within the sections themselves, a lot of calls to action. So like emails for you to write to, or hashtags for you to post on social media. And I don't know why, after doing some of the actions that he tells you to do, you would want to air it on social media, especially considering it's to elevate yourself in business. So it doesn't really match or gel. I find that a bit too, like, scammy almost, that it's just trying to further him and give him more publicity and more reach. And while sometimes I feel like that's fine or acceptable, I don't think it works in this context. I have not read or interacted with any other of his content, so I feel like it'd be very harsh for me to judge him based on this one book. But I do not like this book, otherwise it wouldn't be in this list. So take from that what you will. Yeah, it's not for me at all. And maybe it is. Maybe you read it and felt very differently about it, and if so, I'd love to hear your thoughts. But it's not one for me at all. It gives off a weird vibe, and that's why it's made this list. So that is number one of my most annoying books I've ever read. It's probably no surprise that a few of the books that make it onto this list were actually books that I read doing my book list category in my reading process. So I don't have a choice but to read them. And this book is one of those. It's called Shark by Will Self. And it's definitely a downside to doing this, having this category in my reading process. And you'll soon see why. Okay, so the blurb. 4th of May 1970. A week earlier, President Nixon has ordered American ground forces into Cambodia to pursue the Viet Cong. By the end of the day, 4 students will be lying in the grounds of Kent State University, shot dead by the National Guard. On the other side of the Atlantic, it's a brilliant sunny morning after an April of heavy rain, and at the Concept House Therapeutic Community he has set up in the London suburb of Willesden, maverick psychiatrist Dr. Zach Busner has been tricked into joining a decidedly ill-advised LSD trip with several of its disturbed residents. 5 years later, sitting in a nearby cinema watching Steven Spielberg's Jaws with his young son, Busner realises the true nature of the events that transpired on that dread-soaked day when a survivor of the worst disaster in the US Navy's history, the sinking of the USS Indianapolis in the shark-infested South Pacific, came face to face with the British Royal Air Force observer on the Enola Gay's mission to Hiroshima. And then it kind of just goes on. The first thought I had after reading this book, as I'm sure some of you may find after hearing that blurb, is what the actual hell is this book So those like chunks mentioned in the blurb is essentially it. There's not really much else. There's no connection, there's no thread at all. It's also written in what I would describe as a very self-satisfied manner, where he could use plain English. He uses words that I think are designed to trip you up, almost like he swallowed a dictionary writing it. It doesn't really have any effect on the flow of the book or the setting or format. They're just kind of thrown in there arbitrarily, and it just makes for uncomfortable but boring, tedious reading. I think maybe the way it's written, because it talks about an acid trip, maybe it's written as a stream of consciousness because of that. I don't know if that's given it too much credit, but stylistically there is no punctuation, there's no conventional paragraphing. It is not a conventional book in any form, and so I guess that instantly alienates a reader like me, who has to read this book to complete the book list. And maybe if you've chosen to read this, you have a very different take on it, because maybe you're going into it with your eyes wider open than I was. But I just find books like that so difficult to get into and to finish, and to just be able to comprehend what the heck I've just read. I will say I do think it's an absolute stretch that this book made the top 50 books of 2014. That's the list this came from. I really struggle to see how out of every single book written and published in 2014, this was one that made the list. And this wasn't picked by a specific person. I typed into Google best books of 2014, and I don't know what Google had based that off of. I would assume sales. Maybe I'm wrong, but you can't tell me that one. That one made the list. And that brings us swiftly on to book 3 in this list, which is Wolf in White Van, written by John Darnielle, I think is how you say his name. And it is written, or it was in exactly the same book list as Shark. So the 2014 top 50 books as chosen by Google. Let's give the blurb a try, shall we? A terrible event leaves Sean Phillips disfigured when he is only 17. In the weeks following the incident, he creates an adventure game he calls The Trace Italian, where players awake in an apocalyptic America and make their way to safety across an irradiated landscape, decision by difficult decision. The years pass, and Sean lives a quiet life enriched by his games. But when a pair of teenage sweethearts try to seek the trace in the real world, their actions prove fatal, and Sean is forced to confront the dangers of his creation and its origins in his own troubled past. A beguiling story of contingency, solitude, and escape, Wolf in White Van is a heart-stopping debut from a musician and songwriter known for the transcendent power of his words. I'm not going to lie to you, the blurb actually sounds pretty interesting. So, unlike Shark, I actually wanted to read this book, but as soon as I started reading it, that good feeling was gone. It is so drawn out, and it just takes so long to get anywhere in the book. And actually there are parts of the plot that are never explained. So this accident that the blurb talks about, you never get any backstory to it. And I find that really odd, that as a focal point, it's just kind of glazed over. And you find that with some other parts in the book that you assume are going to be pivotal that are just not mentioned, if or barely mentioned. The main character, Sean, in this book is an insanely flawed, twisted individual, and that's the point. But I disliked him so much that it made the book because it chops and changes a lot. It's not in a chronological order, and as I mentioned, it just skips over parts that you would assume would make up the plot. All in all, just a very frustrating book to attempt to read. And I would say it's books like this that make me really wary of going into book lists, and why I don't read the top 50 anymore, because it makes it so hard to want to keep going when you read, for want of a better word, drivel like that. And obviously this whole video is my own opinion, and you may feel differently about the books. Book 4 is the only book that I actually have with me. I've never actually read a Jodi Picoult book before. She's not my style. I know the type of book she writes, and that's not typically something I choose, but I was bought this as part of a Secret Santa gift, and I will always read a book that is gifted to me, no matter what I think of it going into it. And you know, I'm always willing to be proven wrong as well, having never read one of her books before. It's called Wish You Were Here, and the blurb says, Diana O'Toole's life is going perfectly to plan. At 29, she's up for promotion to her dream job as an art specialist, and she's about to fly to the Galapagos, where she's convinced her surgeon boyfriend Finn is going to propose. But then the virus hits New York City, and Finn breaks the news. The hospital needs him, he has to stay. But you should still go, he insists, and reluctantly, she agrees. Once she's in the Galapagos, the world shuts down around her, leaving Diana stranded, albeit in paradise. Completely isolated, with only intermittent news from the outside world, Diana finds herself examining everything that has brought her to this point, and wondering if there's a better way to live. But not everything is as it seems. I will say, right off the bat, I have a big problem with the fact that this book was published in 2021 and features COVID incredibly heavily, like it is the focal point of this book. And I have a real issue with the fact that in 2021, a lot of us were still coming in and out of lockdowns, and a lot of us, or a lot of countries, still had very high infection rates, and it was very much still a threat. So the idea of somebody profiting out of something that is still ongoing, or was still ongoing at the time, galls me. Is that the right use of that word? I find it galling. There we go. And I just don't like it at all. Like, to have the grace to give it some time at least. That leaves a really bad taste in my mouth. I'm gonna get into it, so I apologise in advance for any Jodi Picoult fans, but I found the main character unbearable. She was whiny, she was self-centered, she treated her boyfriend like crap. She just annoyed the living shit out of me. There was nothing redeeming about her whatsoever. Considering that the focal point of the book is COVID, and her boyfriend, as the blurb says, is stuck in New York dealing with COVID patients. She has zero empathy towards him and manages to make everything about herself. I don't know how we're supposed to like her as a character when she behaves like that. And there's a situation that happens when she's on the Galapagos that makes me want to scream. I also just found it to be wildly unrealistic. And I know, and I've spoken before about romance books and about how a lot of people treat romance books as escapism. They're not meant to be realistic. But when it focuses so heavily on COVID, it's not really an escape. When you're like knee deep in it, the first half of the book for me was just one big eye roll. And do not get me started about the second part or the last part of this book. It was so infuriating that I legitimately wanted to throw the book across the room. I really did not want to finish as soon as this thing happened that I can't tell you about because it's huge for the plot of the book. But it honestly was such a cop-out, and I hate it when books do this. I think it's so lazy. The way the relationship kind of unfolded at the end felt like the author needed a reason to make something happen, and so something else, I know I'm talking in riddles, gets blown way out of proportion, and it makes no sense. There's no logical sense. And to me, it actually just made me hate the main character even more. I know Jodie Picoult has a huge following, and I apologise if you're one of them, but this for me was an absolute no. And that is why it's on this list. I would say, if you have other books of hers, and maybe if there is one, maybe because it was centered in COVID, that it was always gonna have that against it, feel free to try and suggest another one of her books that you think I might enjoy more. I'm happy to attempt to keep an open mind. So I think I might have saved the worst for last, and this is another one that was in a book list, but this one was in the top 50 books of 2015, which was also chosen by typing into Google. And I actually can see why this one specifically made it to that list, because at the time it was everywhere. You could not avoid it at all, no matter where you turned. It was a very, very popular series that was made into a movie, and I'll give you a second to lock in your answers. If you guessed 50 Shades of Grey, 5 points. This one is called Grey, 50 Shades of Grey, as told by Christian. I'm gonna have to read you, as I have with the others, the blurb of this one. Christian Grey exercises control in all things. His world is neat, disciplined, and utterly empty, until the day that Anastasia Steele falls into his office in a tangle of shapely limbs and tumbling brown hair. He tries to forget her, but instead is swept up in a storm of emotion he cannot comprehend and cannot resist. Unlike any woman he has known before, shy, unworldly Anna seems to see right through him, past the business prodigy and the penthouse lifestyle, to Christian's cold, wounded heart. Will being with Anna dispel the horrors of his childhood that haunt Christian every night, or will his dark sexual desire, his compulsion to control, and the self-loathing that fills his soul drive this girl away and destroy the fragile hope she offers him? As with Jodie Picoult, the last book, I'm not going to hold back, so warning if you like this book. This book is the biggest pile of trash I have ever read. And that's saying something considering the books mentioned on this list. I have never, ever come so close to DNFing a book as I did with this one. And it almost made me rethink my whole reading strategy because of it. It was a struggle. My friends actually laughed at me when I told them about this book and how hard I was finding it to get through, because it's too much. It's not even a short book either. If you look on Amazon, it's over 500 pages of what? Trash. I'm telling you. I think this book series, so all of the 50 Shades books as well as the ones told from Christian's perspective, were referred to as mummy. I mean, the spice level, as I'm sure we all know, is through the roof. I remember someone I worked with at the time, a very shy man, reading a section of the book and just going bright red because he couldn't handle the spice level. But outside of that, which I don't even find that well written anyways, there is zero substance, zero plot, zero anything. The characters, all of them, annoyed the shit out of me, and especially Christian. situation. It's written like a teenager read one book and just decided to have at like a typewriter. Just, that was the first thing they came up with. Nobody checked it. They just were like, yeah, that will do. And just threw it out there for people. I haven't actually read the original 50 Shades series. I don't know if it is different in terms of the content, but from what I can see when I was putting together this list, it is exactly the same. There's no nuance, there's no different take you get on it, and I'm just gonna say it, there is absolutely nothing sexy to me about his and Anna's relationship. He's a manipulator, he's controlling, he's a narcissist. It's so problematic that I really don't understand, and maybe I'm just being too British about it. I don't understand how that is sexy. I haven't watched the films, I haven't read the actual book, and I know I said I would be willing, maybe, to read a Jodi Picoult book, and I have agreed to give authors a second chance in the past. I'm looking at you, Stephen King. But you could not pay me to read the original 50 Shades trilogy, I think it is. Absolutely no chance. No way. I draw the line here. So if you are fans of this series of books, you can keep it, but I will have no part in it. So there you go. 5 of the worst books I have ever read. I will say honourable mention to Colleen Hoover's It Ends With Us for just being wildly problematic, and Roses of May for just being terrible, almost probably swore then. But I have covered those books in reviews in other videos, so feel free to go back and watch those there. While you're at it, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, turn your notifications on so you can get notified. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed that, and let me know if any of these would make your top worst books. That's terrible English, but you get my drift. So yeah, let me know if any of these would make it, or any others that you consider to be truly, truly god awful. I would love to know.